Hello and welcome to another episode of Love and Citizenship. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. And I realised that was a very excited hello, but that's because it's taken me 6 tries to get it this far. And I'm really hoping this 7th one really hits the mark. But I'm really excited. I'm really grateful for the conversation that's happening in this episode. Because ever since I thought about this podcast, I wanted this perspective of life in the boarding school, but it just didn't feel right to kind of bring this conversation in without having sort of foundation of what boarding culture was like. So if you're new to this podcast and you haven't checked it out yet, might I encourage that you listen to the episode with Ronit Borpujari, ideally before this episode, but I would encourage you to listen to that episode immediately after this as well, because it gives you a lot of the perspective of what culture on the fort was like. And this episode then, in many ways, is a commentary on the culture from the perspective of somebody who completely got the other side of the deal. Which brings me to our guest. My guest today is Sukanya Shukla, who is the daughter of one of our teachers on the fort. And I am so eternally grateful that she decided to come onto the podcast, knowing well enough what this conversation might look like. And I had certain ideas of what this conversation might entail and certain things that I wanted to talk about. But the directions it took, the depth we went into, it hit me, and it kind of stayed with me in ways I didn't really expect it to. And I am so very grateful it did, because it allowed me to reflect on my own kind of presence on the fort and the times that I may have stood by silently while knowing a lot of the things that were happening. And same as that episode with Ronit, the caveat to all of this is these are very subjective experiences. The intention isn't to slander the name of the institution. The institution itself has done so much good. But like the culture, the ever-changing culture on the fort did have many drawbacks to it. And this is but a perspective or 2 perspectives on the culture of what that fort was like. I would encourage that you listen to this with an open mind, that you bring into this listening experience a lot of empathy for the kid that Sukanya was while she was still on the fort, but also, and this is a disclaimer that we talk about on the podcast, at no point is this an expectation of an apology. If you feel like you may have wronged people on the fort, there's no expectation of you to go apologize. I think it's just a process of reflecting on the journey that you've had and maybe how you can be better now. And that is all I'm going to say about it. Again, Sukanya, I am so incredibly grateful that you decided to have this conversation with me, that you allowed me to get a glimpse into your life on the fort. And it really has changed the way that I look at a lot of my time on the fort. And again, I cannot stress how incredibly difficult it must have been. And I cannot state this enough. I am just in awe of the vulnerability that you brought into this episode, but also just it's a conversation that will stay with me for a very long time. But that is all I'm going to say about this episode, and I let the episode do the talking. If you like what we do, please do consider checking out our other episodes. Or if you want to support me, consider checking out our Patreon. It's linked down below, and you get early access to all these episodes along with a lot of my writing. But without further wait, my guest for this episode, Sukanya Shukla.
So my name is Sukanya. We went to school together, Pranav and I. Mm-hmm. We both were in Scindia school, which was an all-boys school. But the reason why there were a small number of girls in the school was because there was a rule that if one or both your parents taught there, you could also go to the school even if you were female identifying. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I was one of the 6 girls, or when I was in 12th grade, I think there were like 6 of us left in the entire school. I loved a lot of things about that school. I was very active in like poetry, speaking competitions. I liked debating a lot, although that was something that I was always like, no, my sister is better than that. So I like stayed away from that genre. So I would not be compared in one field. Like sibling comparison would not exist. So I just did not participate in that much. But I then graduated Scindia, and then I came to Bates College in the US, where I double majored in theater and psychology. And I did a concentration in the human body. Now I work in Boston Children's Hospital in Boston, and I do research with the Division of Adolescent Medicine and GYN here. So very much a straight out of undergrad job, but I really, really love research. I've come to love it even more here. And I'm currently preparing for nursing school, hopefully next year. So yeah, that's me.
if she sounds like she's achieved a lot, that's because she has. And I'd like to think the signs were always like there. And I can imagine, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But I'd be obviously very curious to know how much the experiences of the fort kind of you carry with you, which I think will be in many ways a lot of the conversation. But I suppose to get the ball rolling, I have my own experiences of the fort, but I think I want to maybe start with like an exploration of your own experiences. So what was that like for you being in that environment?
Okay, so I actually remember the day my mom told my sister and I that we'd be moving to Gwalior.
Mm-hmm.
And she was really excited. I remember her coming back. She came back from her interview and she knew it went well. But of course, because my mom is so down to earth, she's never like shares that she's good at anything. So she was just like, yeah, it went okay. And, we'll see what happens. And then within a week, I think we had started packing to move.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was just, at the time, I was like, this is going to be such a great experience. That my mom kept pointing out a lot of the positives, which were positives when I started school.
Yeah.
Like so much exposure to such good education, like so many new dreams to have that I never would have like thought of even having in Dehradun.
Yeah.
And so when I first came to Scindia, I was still in 4th grade. So I had to go to a different school first and then start Scindia in 6th grade. But my sister, because she was a year older than me, she already started. So she was kind of like she opened a lot of doors for me. And like, I learned from her experiences a lot.
Yeah.
So I remember that she would, work her absolute ass off like the entire time. She was a very dedicated, passionate learner. And a lot of the times that was like her, I don't know, like, I don't want to speak for her, but I think a lot of the times us doing good academically was considered like, well, that's the best you can do in terms of like when you're not in an all boys school, academics is the one way that you can prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated classrooms. I hated going to the school. I was the bitchiest kid in the morning. Like I was like, my mom was like, well, your sister studies so hard, like, and everything she has. And she never did it in a comparison way. She more did it like, this is something you could learn from your sister. But I just, for the life of me, could never appreciate education in that sense. I was always very hands-on. I wanted to go out and do things and do activities. And I was actually very excited to like start playing sports when I first started Scindia, but very, very soon I realized that if I were to be part of any sports team, it would have to be something that was like an individual sport. So I started with table tennis. And then I dared to join the basketball team and I was kicked out like within a week. And that definitely took a hit on my self-esteem. But I think overall, like, growing up in Scindia, like it was so much like confusion, so much like joy at times, so much excitement, so much like recognition, so many dreams to be had and like fulfilled.
Yeah.
I think overall it did take away from like me growing up at my own pace. I think studying in an all boys school required me to grow up too fast, too soon. And I think I've been in therapy since I started college, but I think that's something I'm still processing. I still hold a lot of grudge against that.
Yeah.
This almost like things that you would hear, things that you were expected to do as a girl. I just always felt like when you're in it, it feels so normal. It feels like, well, that's what you're expected to do, so you should do it. But I think in hindsight, a lot of these things were really harmful to hear. A lot of nights where I could just like endless crying and fights with my mom. One thing that I still also hold a grudge against was I think my relationship with my mom could have been much better in Scindia had it not been an all boys school and had it not come with a lot of like the negatives that it did, as much as the positives, but a lot of like messaging that was there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have blamed my mom as much for us being in an all boys school. I would have been able to see things from her perspective, but truly as a 13, 12-year-old, I just wanted to be happy and have friends and just be someone who people considered worthy of friendship and not constantly being sidelined and bullied. So I think like there was a lot that I took from it. I have great friends from Scindia, but I think overall, I'm still trying to process the negatives so I can like see the positives better.
Yeah.
Because there definitely were. There was a lot of things that I still look back on and it absolutely fills me with joy and like makes me laugh and I have really good memories. But I just wish that it was also different.
Yeah. I am really sorry that you had to experience all of that because no kid should. No student should feel like they've been sidelined or denied opportunities. Like, I can't get over the fact that you were not allowed to play basketball a week into it. And let's be honest and call what it is for. Scindia was a deeply misogynistic place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But to just based off the things that you said there, I know you said that there were experiences that really pulled you down, or experiences that really soured the experience of what that fort was. To whatever degree you feel comfortable, what were some of those experiences and what was it like?
Yeah. I think out of like all the experiences, there's obviously some that you have as a teenager. Everything is so confusing when you hit puberty. Everything sucks. And the most confusing time, like there I am trying to like create the best impression on stage with words, but I also want to look good, and nothing makes sense as a teenager, truly. But I think like a lot of things that were negatives definitely stemmed from, you put it perfectly, from like a very misogynistic culture that was not only present, but heavily endured, heavily promoted.
Yeah.
Why I say that with more emphasis is because I think the more I grow up, the more I've come to realize that I personally believe that it's affected me that way too, that if I think about incidents that took away from like me growing up as a happy kid, or, broke my heart a lot of times, like in a very like, oh my God, I just want acceptance. Like, why can't I get that kind of way? I think in those incidents, I mostly remember like the people who were there, who watched it happen and who didn't do anything, than the person who was inflicting the harm, I think. I don't know why that is, but I think it just hurts more to know for a fact that there were so many people around that saw it happen, ignored it, because you as a 12-year-old, as a 13-year-old were expected to sort of like put up with it. Or I as a 13-year-old was expected to put up with it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes why people expected us to put up with it was because in their eyes, it was a pretty sweet bargain. Like, we were going to an all-boys school. We were not paying full tuition. We were still, as kids, we could make use of all opportunities and, stuff that was on board. And at the time, to me, it made perfect sense. I was like, well, of course, like if I'm not paying tuition here, it makes sense that I'm being treated in such a bad way. Like, it makes sense that I have to put up with some sort of hardship. But in hindsight, I don't think any 12 or 13-year-old girl, or any girl for that matter, especially in like that is such a vulnerable age in anyone's like journey of growing up, should have to put up with that. And one of the incidents that I like still think about a lot was, I think I was in 10th grade or something. I had a fight. I'm not going to name names. I just don't feel comfortable about that. But I was sitting in one of my German lessons and something happened. I don't know what, like something in discussion. And I said, like, I responded to this guy and I was like, you know what, you can fuck off or something. And I said that. And then I remember soon after that, class ended. We came outside and I was walking downstairs to my next lesson. And this guy who I had said that to came behind me and he slapped me. And I actually remember looking at his face and I was like, do you realize what you did? And if you did, then why are you not apologizing already? What really scared me about that look and what scared me to be in Scindia was that he was convinced that he was right. He knew what he did was right. He knew what he did was, he was almost entitled to do that. And I think that's something that really scared me about Scindia, because then it made me very confused. I was like, well, then what am I entitled to? Am I entitled to respect? Can I ask for it? Do I deserve it? And that wasn't the first time that someone had like mistreated me in Scindia, but that was the first time that someone had like physically abused me. And I think like it was just such a hard thing to like digest that it just felt humiliating. And it felt humiliating more because there were so many teachers there. There were so many students there. And the minute they saw my mom, everybody just was like, okay, I guess that's taken care of. Like, we don't need to step in. But I'm just like, no, but you, and there were male teachers soon. I was just like, you as a male teacher stepping in and saying that what he did was wrong might be the only way to convince a guy that he is wrong and that he shouldn't be doing that. And he's not entitled to hit people. Yeah. But I remember that. And then like, you know, my mom and one of the other teachers too, they took me to their office and they like calmed me down. And you know, by then it was like lunchtime. And I will never forget this. I remember walking into what we called mess, our dining hall in school. And
it was a mess.
It was a mess. Yeah. And I remember like this guy who had hit me, he comes out of that like side area where you would wash your hands. And he came out of there, and there were like a couple of guys following him who weren't my friends, but acquaintance, or even if not friends or acquaintances, like people I would still expect to, not do this kind of stuff. They were following him, and I remember them patting him in the back. And like, as I'm walking in, still crying with my mom and my sister, and they were patting him in the back and says like, you have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to apologize for. And till this day, I don't think they think that was wrong, because they think that if I can tell someone to fuck off, I deserve to be beaten up. And it was always more about like policing how girls responded. Yeah. There was a lot of like, well, we can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you react. So why don't you react in a more peaceful way? And it does not work that way. Like, I'm also a 12 and 13-year-old teenager. I also have a big ego. I also don't want to be humiliated in front of people. So yeah, I think like that was one of the incidents that really threw me off. And I think after that, it was really, really hard for me to like feel safe in school, mostly because I was so scared of just the humiliation that can follow from things like that. Yeah. And then also like something, I think another big thing that took away was like just the joy of being a kid. Like, I wanted nothing more on Holi and like Diwali to like go, especially Holi, because there was a lot of like people who stayed back for Holi around boards, especially to just go and have fun with people. But I wish there was like, I could say that there was at least one Holi in my 7 years at Scindia where my mom wasn't like, be careful, like keep an arm's length. Don't go into big crowds of boys. Like, don't do this, don't do that. And it's crazy. The irony is that I did all of that, and yet I don't think there was one Holi where I wasn't groped or I wasn't touched inappropriately, or someone didn't make a comment about, what I was wearing, or whether if it was too tight. And, when those kind of comments come from people your age, like kids your age, it really, really sucks. It really hurts. But what hurts more is that sometimes and often they came from male teachers. And I think that was the most like appalling part for me. Just this like hypersexualization of really, really young girls. And I think like that took away a lot of like my childhood. Like, I think I was always too focused on trying to not be perceived as a sexual being, even though, like, I don't know what made me be perceived that way, apart from me just being a girl in an all-boys school. But it also just, like, really, it made, to me, the messaging that was sent was, like, it made me feel really dirty, and it made me feel really, like, isolated, or like that I was doing something terrible by being a girl. And I did not have a choice in the subject matter. Like, that's who I was born as. I'm proud to be a woman. But yeah, I think when I think about some of the structures, I think like those two things are the big things that come to mind. Like, I just don't think, like, now where I am right now, I just don't think like anything can justify like harm done to little girls or little kids. And now that I think about it, I was just like, man, I wish someone had stepped up and said, no, what you're doing is wrong. Yeah. That was a lot. But to answer your question, like, those are some of the big things that like stood out for me. Yeah.
This is the entire caveat to everything I'm about to say is this comes from a place of a privilege in that I was a man. And it's a couple of things, obviously. The first thing that immediately as you were telling that story, I was like, okay, shit, that happened. But also I'm not surprised in the least that happened. Yeah. And that speaks so much about that culture of silence. We all knew. And what annoys the shit out of me, because I was going to ask you what happened to that kid after. Mm-hmm. But like you said it, he would have probably gone back home, his own house, and celebrated as the ultimate bond for slapping a little girl. And the thing, as you're talking about it, as you're describing your experience, I can't help but shake this feeling. And I've had this feeling for years. When you look at Scindia, it's a pocket dimension, right? It's a little tiny place in the middle of like a smallish size city in the country that's like fucking billions of people. But even in that small environment, you take that culture out and it's literally evident everywhere. We're still talking about a culture, and not just in India, a lot of places where it's like women have to police themselves. It's never about, why can't we teach our boys to be better? Why aren't we talking about the fact that boy deserved to be reprimanded more than you needed to be told, hey, Sukanya, when you're going out on Holi, you shouldn't have to worry about the clothes you're wearing or how big of a crowd it is. Because you absolutely lived it. I have known, or all my years in Scindia, that women were groped, teachers were groped,
Yep.
which is such a horrible thing to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like apart from like girls as well, like I think in general, there was that lack of conversation, like appropriate touch. Like even I saw like between guys and I would like be like, you know, sometimes guys would be like, well, no, like, you know, we're friends, like he enjoyed it. And I could see on the face like, well, because I'm not sure if he has the right space to say anything against what you did. I think he's on the spot. I think he has to laugh it off as if he's cool with it, but I don't think he is. And I think that was just such a, like, what gives someone the right to just approach you and touch you? Like that was so normal in that environment, I think, to, you know,
For us as boys in the boarding house, we were beaten to death.
Yeah.
But it's, man, you're so spot on. You're so spot on. And it's the thing, we've all known about it. I mean, I can't help but we reconnected years later after I put out the essay about my sexual assault at school.
Yep. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everybody knew about it. Yeah. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Jason Mazumdar was one of the most inappropriate teachers the school had ever had.
He was. I had several instances with him and I did not like any of that.
But yeah. And I will never put it on the kids because as kids we were like, look at him. He's a funny teacher talking about condoms and sex and dicks.
Yep.
Teachers knew about it.
Yep. No, everybody knew about it. Yeah.
The last day I was assaulted, as I was in his house, there was another teacher present on the premise, and I'm not going to take names.
Yeah.
He knew probably what Jason was accused of because I wasn't the only student Jason ever abused.
Yeah.
And this is, I suppose, we can be here, we can say these things, but this is what I'm, and I can't help but shake this. I absolutely cannot help but shake this. And I know this is a bit of a deviation from like being on the fort. Mm-hmm. You leave the fort, you go outside the boundaries of the city, you start college, you leave India as well. How is that? What do you bring from the fort?
What happened was that these messaging that I took with me was not only then, and I can say that now because I've done a lot of work with like, you know, holding myself accountable for when I've caused harm to people as well. But I think the messages that I took from Scindia caused me harm post Scindia, like when I moved to the States, even when I was in college, but also like, I think it really took away from how I would have liked to be in other people's lives or how present I would have liked to be in other people's lives or the kind of friend I would have liked to be, the kind of person I would have liked to be. I think after Scindia, my self-esteem was so 6 feet under that I think I became an extremely, and I think somewhere I still am and I have to work on it, but I think I became an extremely people-pleasing person. Mm-hmm. And I think like that piece had definitely taken the longest time for me to overcome. Two of my like really, really, really good friends here, I think they have really helped me like embrace being a woman in a lot of ways. They never find anything I do like weird, or they never find anything I ask or say like weird. But I think like what kept me from like embracing my friendship with not just them, but for like with other people for a long time was I was just like, oh my God, I cannot make a mistake. Like I cannot make a mistake. I cannot piss someone off. Like they will leave my life. Like then I won't have any friends. Like this sort of like fear of always being alone. Mm-hmm. And I think like that really kept me from like being my true self and making mistakes in friendships. And then when I started, you know, letting loose a little bit and actually like allowing myself to be who I am, it definitely helped to have a sort of positive feedback from people and say, look, we understand you did something wrong, but that doesn't mean that we're going to leave your life or that you're not worthy of love. You always will be, but here's how you can be better. And I think like if that messaging was present in Scindia, I think I would be so much better, I think, at friendships and at relationships in general. And when I first moved here, I remember at Bates, like I had started working on this production and I was super excited. It was like my freshman year in college. I was, oh my God, like I got cast in the production and I was so happy and I was, you know, doing it. And I remember there were a lot of like men involved in the process from like the costume, not the costume designer, the lighting designer, my assistant stage manager, like they were all men. And I remember being so shocked when people looked at me and like smiled and said hi. I was just like, well, I haven't even done anything. Like I was just like, well, I haven't proven my worth yet. So why are you respecting me? And it was very empowering to realize that that's how I thought, but also heartbreaking that that's how I have thought for all these years in my life. That in order for me to achieve like the most basic respect, I need to have proven my worth in some way. Mm-hmm. I remember I still I would text my mom in our group chat with my sister and my mom and be like, oh my God, like guys are so nice. Like they say hi to me and like they don't call me names and like they don't, not that's there's not plenty of that in the US. Like there obviously is. But just this transition was so stark for me. Like it really stood out. And as I was typing these things, I realized, well, I'm a human being, so I guess I deserve that. I don't have to do anything out of my way for someone to not treat me badly, for someone to not, like hit me. And that was like something that it took a long time to like come to terms with post Scindia. And then another thing I think was romantic relationships was really hard, really, really hard. And they still are in a lot of ways because of the things that I carry from Scindia and things that happened after Scindia. I think I also shared this with you after your article, that I'm also a survivor of sexual assault.
Yeah.
And I had still so much more processing to do from Scindia, that having that happen like soon after coming to college was really, really tough, because then all of these messaging was getting reinforced. Like, well, this was going to happen. Like, of course this happened. Like, have you looked at your life? Like, you are the doormat. Of course this will happen to you. And I think that even like more sort of like came between my relationship with my mom. Like, I remember coming back home that summer break after it had happened, and I just could not look at my mom. Like, and it was so hard on her. I know it, but I just remember one evening I was hysterically yelling, and everything from Scindia came back. I was like, this is because of you. Like, why didn't you protect me? Like, why weren't you there? Why didn't you stand up for me? And it was just so many questions that I could not stop asking, even though in the bottom of my heart, I knew it wasn't her, like, it wasn't up to her. It wasn't her in her hands to, One thing I've always appreciated about her is her, that she wasn't a helicopter parent and isn't. And then at the same time, I was kind of like being like, well, why haven't you been there? But I think like a lot of that anger that was being directed towards my mom was just suppressed anger from Scindia. And part of the reason why I felt like so weird about that, because this entire concept of like daddy issues was just not leaving my head. Like after the assault, even in all my relationships, like I don't know, like it's something that I've been so conditioned to think about. Every time in Scindia I would do something wrong, teachers often would be like, well, she's being raised by a single mom. Like there's only so much we can expect from kids who were raised by single moms. And that was so, I mean, amongst a lot that was assumed about my mom and our little family on Fort, I think that was one of the worst assumptions to make. Like that for some reason, outwardly, I pursue disrespect, that I pursue violence.
Yeah.
In that sense, I think like the term daddy issues was like really detrimental to my growth. And it still is. It's something I'm still working on in therapy. I don't know why people feel so comfortable like labeling girls that. It is used for girls who are brought up by single moms and whose dads have been absent, which mine has been. And so I think like, I always struggled with the fact that like, my dad never had wanted anything to do with my sister and I. And it still kills me. It's still something I'm working on in therapy. It's still something I need to like do a lot of like forgiving on and have a lot of grace for myself towards. But I just found it absolutely frustrating and annoying that that's the term I'm being labeled by as a consequence of an action done by a fully developed man. And I have to then look at other men through that lens and be more forgiving and be more accepting of violence in some sense, because I don't know, it's just a very twisted social concept and I don't get it at all. And that was such a hard thing to like process alongside with my incident of sexual violence.
Yeah.
It was one of the most horrible things that I had to deal with and I'm still dealing with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what kept me truly from like, for the longest time to accept that what happened wasn't my fault, which was also confusing because if it happened to anyone else, any of my friends, I kept thinking that's the one thing I would tell them, the first thing I would tell them. But it's so hard to do that for yourself after having grown up in a culture like that. So yeah, it really, really, I think, came between my mom and I, all of the stuff from Scindia, and then just burst out because of this one incident.
Yeah.
But we're moving past it. We're working on it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Two things that I do want to say. Nobody is deserving, literally nobody should ever be made to feel unsafe in their self. And assault does that to you in such a significant way, but that is like a history dating back to Scindia. And the fact that at any point you felt that you were responsible for any of those things that happened to you is rotten to the core. And I'm an external person. I know I am still doing the work on this as well, because for years I blamed myself for being raped by a teacher.
Yeah.
But I hope you know, even if at the end of the day it's what we say to ourselves that matters the most, I hope you know that that wasn't you. And not that you ever have to or ever needed to vie for 1 second of, you know, that you deserve to be treated with decency. But my fucking Lord, Sukanya, to go from a place where you were constantly disrespected to the person that you are right now, obviously on a Zoom screen in front of me, I am so in awe of you, but I am also so hecking proud of you, dude.
Thank you so much.
Honest to fucking God. Because it takes, man, that is some strength of character that I wish I have, is basically what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to glamorize this. I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal.
No.
I just feel like I have to say this.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I want to say, I used to debate with your sister. And I'll keep this brief because I know she's not part of the conversation at the moment. But I think when I saw you guys on the fort, there was always this feeling of like there's a wall there. We often like to colloquially joke about it as like the resting bitch face. Right? And I always used to wonder, you know, why are they like that? Why is there and I apologize again, but like, why is there the resting bitch face? Mm-hmm. I'm surprised there wasn't more. I'm surprised like you managed to be such a contributing member of that fort, both of you, because it makes so much more sense to me now. It's a defense mechanism. It's how you learn to survive. It's how you have to survive.
Yeah.
And it took me years to be like, holy shit, that environment must have been horrible. And I really have to be honest, after you reached out to me when I put that essay out, I'm so grateful you did. And I'm so grateful we talked. And I'm so grateful you're here. Again, at the risk of sounding repetitive, I'm so incredibly proud of you.
Thank you.
So with that said, your mum, I can only imagine what that experience is for her in many ways. What was your relationship like? What's that like to have that relationship with the two people who maybe get it the most, but are also just like constantly the system is rigged against in so many ways?
It's very, very confusing. It made room for a lot of unnecessary jealousy. I don't know what the right word is, but just sort of like anger, like weird anger towards my parent, which was my mom. Mm-hmm. Most of her fights that we had when we were in Scindia, my mom and I, you know, my mom did that for us. She left her life in Dehradun. She took that chance for us. The heart of that decision was giving for my mom was, you know, I want to give my kids the best of the best. And that's something our family never compromises on. Education, like no matter what the price is, no matter what it is, like obviously, you know, coming from like a middle class family, we were always, if you want to study outside, work hard, get good financial aid and you can go. But it was never something that was taken away from us. Like even if, you know, we had to pay, so then we have to pay, like, so what? And I think like she did that in mind. She's like, she knew that her daughters will have so many things and so many dreams and so many more opportunities if you were to move to the school. But for me as a 12-year-old kid, I hated that. I have to leave all my friends, everything, and pick up my life, move to Gwalior, where I know no one. I hadn't even heard of Gwalior at that. Like, I didn't even know like where we were going. Mm-hmm. But I think like as a 12-year-old, like it was really hard for me to see that from her perspective. And quite frankly, like, I don't think any like a kid should have to. So I know she understood where I was coming from, but it was so hard. Like she would hear all sorts of things about us in the stock room, like teachers coming up to her and be like, well, Sukanya was standing with this guy next to the water cooler, or Sukanya was doing this today. Like she spoke this way. And the words that were used to describe us was always witty, cunning, calculative, stubborn. And at the time, sometimes like they were said to us in a complimentary way, like, oh, you are like a strong-willed woman. Like, you know, you are stubborn. And I'm just like, if me telling you that you can't comment on what I'm wearing is me being stubborn, then I would love for you to meet an actually stubborn person.
Oh God. Well done on standing up for yourself. You are stubborn now.
Yeah. And I think like my mom would then come back and she'd be like, she would do her best. She would say, look, I understand it's hard, but we are in this environment. The first things that people are going to say are going to be about you and me and not about the guy. But I just, even at the time and even now, I'm just like, that is so unfair. And my mom was also in a very like vulnerable spot, at the time. Yeah. She was trying her best to make a living for the both of us, to bring up 2 daughters in an all-boys school, like just give us the best opportunities always. But I think my resentment towards her was a lot of the times I was just like, oh, so you're doing this because you want to prove that you can be a good single mom. Like, it's about you. So you were doing this because, you want the world to know that you are capable of raising 2 daughters by yourself. And I think like, as much as it must have been hard for her to hear that, I think like I was just going through it in Scindia. Like, I was just so tired of crying at night. I was so tired. I remember like in 8th grade, things were like really, really bad one time. And I came home and that's the first time I contemplated suicide. And it was really, really, really tough to have my mom and my sister there, be able to talk to them, not about suicide, but be able to talk to them about like what I'm going through at school. And them also being stuck in a place where they don't know what to quite do or how to quite help, how to make things easier for me. Because there was that one aspect like, oh, well, we are no less. We're going to do exactly as much or even more than the guys, because that's how my sister and I were. We were very active in Scindia. We wanted to participate in everything. But I just didn't like that it came with such a big cost. I just didn't understand why it did. And I think with my mom, like she obviously still till day we talk about it and she has some guilt about us having gone to Scindia, but again, we're working on it as a family. We're processing it together. But I think like there was just like, I think solid like 3-4 years where I resented my mom. And it was really, really tough because I also loved her to death. And then with my sister, it was a lot different. She understood a lot of the things that I said. Like she was the first person I like asked her about, what is it like to be attracted to guys? Like, what does that mean? And, all of these open conversations with her, I was able to have. But at the same time, I also saw her struggle so much and like hit several walls with making her mark and like making friends and being accepted. And I think like in all of that, and this is something that I have not been able to forgive myself yet for it, and I am processing it, I think I became the perpetrator of a lot of things that I faced at home. Like I had boyfriends in school, so did my sister. But it was never considered like a relationship. Like it was always like, the way it was talked about to us was like, what are you like in such disgust, as if we were doing something that not any other teenager would be doing, like as if guys there don't have girlfriends like all over the country visiting them for like inter-school competitions with the sole purpose of visiting them. And
I can see you looking at me. It's okay.
Like it was, and I like it was just really like ironic. I was just like, do you not see like the difference here? But I think after a point I became like so like people pleasing, and I was like, oh my God, okay, if keeping my mouth shut, keeping my head low and just making myself as small as possible is what it's going to take to survive the next 5 years in the school, then sure, I'll do that. And you use that word survive, and I think that you capture that perfectly. I think for the most part, especially like 6th through 9th grade, I was just surviving. Like, I think I was waking up every day and making sure I was like, okay, I'm going to get through today, and that's okay. And like with my sister, like it was like so hard because then I accepted that I was like, I have to keep myself small and keep my face down and shut my mouth. But what I love most about my sister is she never was one to take bullshit from anyone. She was never the one to say, okay, I will just accept what you did and move along. Yeah. And I was the exact opposite. So when my sister would stand up for herself, like I would see how it would affect my mom, because my mom would hear all these things from people like, your daughter's raising voices at boys. Like, I think at one point, one of the teachers did tell my sister that like she should never raise her voice at guys because guys have an ego. And I was like, wait, what?
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah. And so like, a lot of the times when my mom would be struggling and she'd be like, why can't you guys, like, she was so fed up. She's just like, just do it. Like, just make it through the day. Like, please, I'm begging you. I would be like, yeah, okay, I got it. My sister was like, at no cost, never will I keep my mouth shut if someone is telling me the wrong thing. And so I became the perpetrator of like a lot of things for my sister. And to this, I feel bad. I would like call her names. I would be like, why are you doing this? Like, are you actually stupid? Like, basically like telling her that what she's doing by just being herself, by taking a stand is wrong, when that's exactly what I had a problem with. I think I was so tired that I was just like, I'm fed up. Like, I give up. I'll, whatever it takes. And then I was calling all these names to my sister, like telling her that she was bad for like living her life as a teenager, for exploring herself, like for having boyfriends. Yeah. And I think like that really like changed my relationship with my sister. I think that's when we stopped talking, which was really hard because my sister, like till this day, everything she says is right. Everything she says is carved on stone. Like she's my absolute hero. I love her so much, but I think there was like a long period of time. Yeah. I would say most of Scindia that I had just like feelings of jealousy and resentment because of that. And then there was sibling comparison. Like people could not digest the fact that my sister was good academically and like studious and wanted to do debating. And she was also good at sports. Like she was great at pistol shooting, which is what I also did eventually. Like, and people just could not digest that I wasn't the same. Like they were like, well, why aren't you getting all A's and why aren't you? And honestly, I could if I wanted to, but it just was never my priority. I was never the kind to sit behind a desk for hours and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to study. Like I was always the kid to want to go out, to like want to have fun. And sibling comparison, definitely. Like I remember there was one time like she got the scholarship to go to Germany. And when I found out, I was so happy. I gave her a hug. I was like, congratulations. And then the incessant comments at school. Like I was scared to set foot in school because everyone was just like, oh, well, next year is going to be you. And I'm just like, that made me so confused. I was like, that's not my priority. Should it be? Like, should I want to be like, want to be wanting to go to Germany and like on this full scholarship and do this and that? And I think like what took the hardest hit on our sibling relationship was when I applied for NYU Abu Dhabi and I didn't get in. And the next day I came into school and there were all these looks and like stares. And I was just like, do you understand how hard it is to get into colleges? Like, and that's like, you apply to 10, you get into 3. Like, and I was just, no one was like willing to see that perspective. It was all just like, well, your sister got in. So like, why not you? No one was willing to hear my side. I was not happy when I went there for my interview. I was not happy. I just wasn't. But everything was just like from this weird place of like sibling comparison, like do this. And I honestly, it felt more frustrating because it didn't stop even after I had done things that my sister hadn't done at school. Like I went for the biking expedition. I went for the mountaineering expedition with my sister, which was a great bonding exercise for us, like 25 days in the mountain, isolated. And we talked about a lot. That was one of the most cherished memories I have with my sister growing up. But I think a lot of resentment growing up, but it's a lot of it has been processed. A lot of it is still being processed. With my sister, I obviously don't have any resentment anymore. I'm able to have more open conversations with her. And I think with my mom, it'll take some time. Our relationship is strong. It's really, really strong. She's absolute my like ride or die. But I think there's some things that are yet to be processed from. Yeah.
Time takes time.
Yeah.
I did warn you about this, where like we'll only get through half of the things that we put on the paper.
Yeah.
But just to kind of wrap things up, I have 2 questions. Actually, 3 questions. There might be a third one. We'll play it by ear.
Okay.
So 2 questions, and these are very tied. If you could, so you have a time machine now, just right now, today, and you go back to grade 9, and you're meeting your grade 9 self. So you're back in time and you have an entire like hour with young little Sukanya. What do you say? What do you talk about? Okay,
this is like, it's going to sound a little silly, but I would really tell her to stop pulling her hair back so much. like literally, I would tell her like, stop oiling the shit out of your hair and stop pulling them back so much that you end up with like just a face and no head. So that's like one of the first things I give.
Solid advice.
Yeah. But I also tell her to give herself a break. I would tell her that not everyone in your life will like you, and that is okay. And I would tell her to think more about like self-love and what that looks like.
Yeah. And this is it's a loaded one in the sense, because I know we're still both, I don't have a concrete answer for this. So I don't expect you to. What's your hope for anybody listening in, especially for like obviously people that, you know, are either part of the fort, were part of the fort, maybe part of the fort. What's your hope for somebody listening to this episode?
I think like some serious reflection, and not for me. Like I don't want people to be like, oh, like now we have to reach out, and if we ever did something, like I do not expect anyone to like reach out with like lengthy apology messages or anything like that. But I think like reflection more in terms of, so how does the cycle stop? So where do we intervene? Like I think I love community, and I love like thinking about generations and like what comes next and everything like that. I think like I think it's time that we think about how we're going to leave this place a little bit better for the next people. And I think like if we're not thinking about that actively, I don't know like if we're being a part of community. So no. I think that is my hope. I hope like there are really happy girls in there right now. I hope if they're not, I hope people are checking in with them. That's my hope. Someone checks in with them and says, are you doing okay mentally? Mm-hmm. So yeah, one, reflection, and two, second hope is just abundant love for all kids in Scindia, but also I have a place in my heart for the girls that go there. So just a lot of love for them. Yeah. Yeah,
man, that is, you have to leave that place better than you found it.
Yeah.
And if you can't, as a present ex or future Scindian, if you can't say that, you've got some serious work to do, and do it. Like I 100% agree. Don't do it for sending Sukanya long apologies.
Yeah, I think please, no.
Sukanya is well on her way. You're well on your way on doing the work.
Yeah, yep.
Right? Start having these uncomfortable conversations with yourself. It's the only way to do it. Yep. Because to say we have a problem, you have to first recognize it. And that's how we fix it. Right. This is my last question. This is ending on a hopeful note before I say my final spiel before we pause this recording. So we've talked about you going back in the time machine.
Yeah.
You're listening to this episode now, 10 years in the future. It's been 10 years since you and I recorded this. I will send you a message on the 10th year anniversary of publishing this episode. Like, hey, 10 years, we did this. Where do you want to be? What's your hope for yourself 10 years from now?
10 years from now, professionally, I think I want to be doing research in women's health and also be a psychiatric nurse practitioner. That's what I want to be. So hopefully professional goals, that's what I want to do. Personally, I want to be able to make more room in my heart for love, for myself more than anyone else, and be more forgiving towards myself, and then also be better with setting boundaries. Like I really want to turn into someone who is able to say no and leave the conversation there and not have to feel like I have to explain myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully still surrounded by a lot of my friends and family. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's my hope.
To future Sukanya listening this, I hope all and more has come to pass. But to you, the one in front of me right now, I had a certain idea of what this may have felt like kind of coming into me and what I was like hoping this conversation would be. But I'm leaving so much more aware, educated on because I think I have run the risk of like just kind of really focusing it on like the perspective of the boys on the fort. Which is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I know there's a whole other side to this that needs voice as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is like 1 hour of that voice and such like, we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I am incredibly grateful to you for having this conversation. But all I will say, and all I will ever say, at the risk of repeating again, I am so incredibly proud of you, but also wishing so much more abundant growth and joy and love for you, Sukanya. I mean, if you are ever in London, or if I'm ever down in the States, we absolutely have to get a cup of coffee, because I would love to catch up with you in person.
Oh my God, I would love that. That would make my day. And also thank you so much for all your affirmations throughout this podcast. I don't think I would have been comfortable at all if you weren't such a great host, and also someone I knew personally. So thank you so much for also sharing your story, because it helped me share mine. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. Like, share, and subscribe usually is what we say, but no, that's where I'm gonna leave it. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to this episode. we have another episode out next week on the Wednesday. And if you like what we do and the work that we're putting out, do consider joining our Patreon. Till then, this has been Love and Citizenship, and I will catch you in the next one.